Have you ever seen destruction like this, even in the end of the world movie?
Well, it all comes despite international condemnation over that Israeli airstrike on Sunday, which led to a devastating fire at a refugee camp, killing 45 people, including women and children.
Bombing so-called safe zones, Israel has been crossing every red line that exists and is quite literally getting away with murder.
This is the living room, and it's now opened to the whole city.
Every time I see the news about Palestine, my heart goes out. I feel the pain. I know you do too. But I also ask a question. How did it all begin? Is Palestine right for claiming that the land belongs to them? Or is Israel the one that is on the right side of the history? And why should there be so much bloodshed? Why are Hamas doing what it is doing? And the answer always is, I don't know. Surprisingly. And I'm sure many of you don't know the actual history either. And so I thought, I need to learn about this as much as others do. So here is all you need to know on how this brutal occupation came to be. And after this video, you should have answers to every single question of how it all started and who is right and who is the real terrorist. A request before we begin, if you genuinely want to know about the actual history, please watch the entire video, as then YouTube will recommend the video to others who are like-minded, and that is the overall objective. I want to educate as many people as possible. Let's begin. You might have heard these two names, Theodore Herzl and Arthur Balfour, often when you try to research on this issue. We will talk about Balfour a bit later, but who is this Theodore Herzl? Well, he is the main character of this story, so listen carefully. Theodor Herzl was an Austrian writer and a journalist who wrote a book called The Judenstaat in 1896, which means the Jewish state. He was of the opinion that Jews in Europe should have their own separate Jewish state in the land of Palestine. Are you getting the point? The first idea of the Jewish state came up in 1896. Perhaps nothing before that. Interesting. He not only wrote the book, he in fact organized the first Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel, and there they collectively pledged to form a Jewish state on Palestine land. And thus the groundwork for the formation of Jewish state was laid, and the Zionists became active. Their elements got to work from setting up factories, increasing Jewish settlements in Palestine, and yes, it goes back to late 1800s. His famous cry, "If you will it, it is no dream," became the motto of Zionist elements. Oh, and by the way, while all this was going on in Europe, there were people living in that land called Palestine. And yes, they were called Palestini. At the time, this land was under Ottoman Empire. In 1917, the Foreign Secretary of Britain, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter to Rothschild, who was the leader of Jews at that time in Europe. It states, and I quote, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people." This was followed by a series of events. And you know what's funny about all of this? Palestinians were never consulted, perhaps weren't even informed. But there was something that acted as a catalyst to the Zionist movement. World War I was fought between two sides. One side was called the Allies. That included UK, USA, Italy, France, Russia, Japan. And the other side was called the Central Powers, which comprised Germany, the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria, Austria, and Hungary. We all know that the Allies won and the Central Powers lost the war. Then the Allies set up something called the League of Nations. This League of Nations would distribute territories of losing nations between them, and they called it the Mandate System. They said we will control these territories until they became independent. Palestine was under Ottomans, the mandate of which was given to the British, and as per the mandate, it was supposed to be declared independent. And now when you look at the world map, Germany, Bulgaria, Austria, Hungary, all are independent nations, but not Palestine. The British could have declared Palestine a free nation, but they did not. Why would they do that? They were colonizers. So they colonized. And all this while, Palestine had no right to raise their army. Their people were helpless and they were under the British mandate. While all of this was happening, British enabled migration of thousands of settlers.
2 former American vessels carrying nearly 4,000 Jewish refugees arrive at the port of Haifa, Palestine.
It encouraged the Zionist militia who were called the Haganah, and they were led by none other than David Ben-Gurion. After looking at waves of settlers setting up colonies, factories, in 1936, the Palestinian people revolted. The British tried their best to curb this. They did this by mass detentions and execution of leaders. As usual, nothing new here, but Palestinians did not give up. They resisted. And this is when British set up the Peel Commission. And this was to chalk out a plan to get a viable solution. And this commission proposed a solution that eventually led to the 1947 two-state solution. It was clear that Palestinians were not getting their free state, and therefore they rejected it, obviously, and the resistance continued till 1939. And by now, almost 30,000 Palestinians had lost their lives, and this was because of several massacres. But then came a twist in the tale. The British knew this cannot go on, as by now it had started hurting their empire. And the selfless people they are, they set up another commission that famously came to be known as the White Paper of 1939. And shockingly, for the first time, the British Commission recommended that there is no place for a Jewish state, and the land belongs to Palestine. An independent state of Palestine will be created in 10 years, and the transfer of power will be done to the people of Palestine. That's what the White Paper of 1939 stated. And surprisingly, they worked towards it. They curbed the setting up of new Jewish factories, limited number of Jewish settlements, and prohibited sale of land to Jews. It looked almost certain that a path was laid to form the state of Palestine. But then something big happened. This was the turning point in the whole situation. As British took heavy toll and were not able to control its colonial occupation or mandate, they started to leave from occupied territories.
For she was bringing home some 1,500 British people. It was, in fact, the first large-scale evacuation of troops, pretty well all regiments in Palestine being represented.
But this was detrimental for Palestinians, as by now, Zionism was a strong force. Remember, they had militia already and had modern weaponry, while Palestinians were not allowed to even take up arms. It only ends one way. And then came the Holocaust. As unfortunate event as it is, millions of Jews were brutally killed, a dark period in the history of mankind. In 1947, British decided to leave Palestine and left it under United Nations. What did UN do? A two-state solution. Shockingly, 55% of the land was given to Jews, majority of which was inhabited by Palestinians.
At Flushing, Long Island, the General Assembly of the United Nations has made its decision on Palestine. The map shows what partition means. The Jewish state colored light, the Arab state dark, Jaffa to go to the Arabs, Jerusalem internationalized.
The resolution of the DAC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
And in order for this to actually happen, all those people living on those land had to be displaced. Almost 200,000 people. Obviously, Palestinians and Arabs rejected this resolution and revolted. On the other hand, Ben-Gurion accepted this proposal, declared himself the Prime Minister of Israel, and thus a new state was formed. By the way, here's a photograph of him taking the oath. Notice the portrait? Theodor Herzl. Told you. And after assuming power, what is the first thing he does? He goes directly against the UN resolution and started occupying more land. Palestine had no army and they had Haganah militia. As a result, by 1948, over 750,000 Palestinian people were forced to leave their lands, their houses. Their properties were destroyed, literally razed to the ground. This is what we call Nakba. Israelis never allowed them to return despite UN resolution asking them to allow them to return to the land. And this resulted in anger amongst the Arab world, and what followed was a result of Israeli barbarism. On one side, there were 6 countries: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And on the other side, Israel was standing alone. Now, on the face of it, you would feel it was not an even battle. However, that wasn't the case. These 6 countries did not mobilize their entire army. The largest army was that of Egypt, that consisted of 10,000 soldiers. Jordan sent 4,000, Iraq 3,000, 3,000 by Lebanon, and 3,000 by Syria, and only a handful were sent by Saudi. So approximately 23,000 soldiers. And on the other hand, Israel fielded 29,000 soldiers. They had emptied their entire garrison. Needless to say, we all know Israel won the war, or as it is said, but they leave out a very important footnote. There were 2 very important areas that went under control of Egypt and Jordan. Egypt took control over Gaza and Jordan over West Bank area. The sad reality is, neither Egypt nor Jordan granted people of Palestine their citizenship, and Palestinians were reduced to being refugees in their own land. But Israel was not happy with Egyptian control over Gaza and Jordanian control over West Bank, so it decided to take them back. Another war broke out between Israel and the Arab League of Nations in 1967. This time, on one side there was Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and on the other side it was Israel. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia said they had intentions to participate. We believe them. We do. On June 5th, 1967, Israel set out to destroy the Air Force bases in Egypt. They called it Operation Focus, and within 6 days won the war against these countries. Details of this war will lead to another video. Should you want one, I'll make it. Write down in the comments. But a very important development took place post-war. Israel got the control of Gaza and West Bank from Egypt and Jordan, and to this day they lie under Israeli control. In 1897, Herzl said in Basel, "I have founded the Jewish state. In 5 years perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will see it." This statement itself is a proof that Jewish state never always existed, as you are made to believe. A lot has happened since then. Governing bodies like PLO came into existence. Hamas was formed in 1980s in Gaza. Limited governance was granted to PLO and much more. However, Israel controls everything that goes in and comes out of these 2 territories, with continuous settlements being built across the land that we call Palestine. Palestinians have no right. They are punished collectively for smallest of things. Their children are abducted. Their homes are raided in the middle of the night. Their properties are razed. And yet when they resist, they are called terrorists. Our knowledge of Palestine is still limited. We know very little of the history. Hopefully this video will clear many basics on beloved Palestine. There are many more topics on which I can make detailed videos, like how was Gaza formed, what is Intifada, how was West Bank created, what is PA, what is PLO, how was Hamas formed. I only request one thing: please like and share this video with your friends. That means YouTube will spread this video with many other people who should know about this. Assalamu alaikum.